The morning sun had barely risen over the palace walls when whispers began to spread through the servant corridors like wildfire. Something unusual was happening in the East Wing, and everyone who worked within those ancient stone walls could feel the tension in the air. The palace had always been a place of secrets, but today felt different. Today felt dangerous. Camilla stood before her gilded mirror, running her fingers through her dark hair. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts she dared not speak aloud. As the wife of the crown prince, she was expected to maintain a perfect image at all times. Every gesture, every word, every glance was watched and judged by countless eyes. The weight of the crown she would one day wear felt heavier with each passing day. Her chamber was one of the most luxurious in the entire palace. Silk curtains hung from the tall windows and priceless paintings decorated the walls. A massive four-poster bed dominated the room, draped in velvet the color of deep burgundy. Everything spoke of wealth and power, yet Camilla felt like a prisoner in a golden cage. Her marriage had been arranged for political reasons, not love. The prince was kind enough, but there was no passion, no connection between them. Outside her door, 2 guards stood at attention as they did every day. They were stone-faced men who had served the royal family for years. Their job was simple: protect the princess and report anything unusual to their captain. They never questioned their orders and never showed emotion. But today, even they seemed uneasy. Something was stirring in the palace, and they could sense it. In another part of the palace, Captain Marcus gathered his most trusted men in a private chamber. His face was grim as he unrolled a piece of parchment on the table before them. The information written there could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. For weeks, he had been receiving reports of strange activities in the East Wing. Servants whispered about seeing shadows where there should be none. Guards reported hearing voices late at night when the princess was supposed to be alone. Marcus was a man of duty and honor. He had served the crown for 20 years and had never failed in his responsibilities. But the task before him now was different. He was about to investigate a member of the royal family, and if the rumors were true, the consequences would be devastating for everyone involved. The king himself had ordered this investigation, though it pained him to suspect his own daughter-in-law of any wrongdoing. The captain looked at his men, each one carefully chosen for their loyalty and discretion. They would need to be careful. One wrong move could start a scandal that would damage the royal family's reputation forever. He explained the plan in a low voice, making sure everyone understood their role. They would wait until the right moment, then move quickly and quietly. There could be no mistakes. Meanwhile, Camilla dismissed her ladies-in-waiting earlier than usual. She told them she had a headache and needed rest, though this was not entirely true. She waited until their footsteps faded down the corridor before moving to a hidden panel in the wall. Her heart pounded as she pressed the carved rose that served as a secret trigger. The panel slid open silently, revealing a narrow passageway that few people knew existed. These secret passages had been built centuries ago, meant to provide escape routes during times of war or siege. Over the years, most people had forgotten about them, but Camilla had discovered them during her first months in the palace when she felt most alone and desperate for freedom. She had explored them carefully, learning where they led and how to use them without being detected. She slipped into the darkness of the passage, carrying a small oil lamp. The stone walls were cold and damp, and she could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. Her silk slippers made no sound on the ancient floor as she moved quickly through the maze of corridors. She had walked this path so many times now that she could almost do it in complete darkness. The passage eventually led to a small, forgotten room deep within the palace walls. It had once been a storage chamber, but now it served a very different purpose. Camilla's breathing quickened as she approached the wooden door. She knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. It was their signal, the code they had agreed upon to ensure safety. The door opened, and there he stood. Thomas was not a prince or a nobleman. He was a scholar who had come to the palace to work in the royal library. His family had no title, no land, no power, but he had something that Camilla's husband never could give her: genuine love and understanding. They had met by accident in the library 6 months ago, both reaching for the same ancient book of poetry. Their hands had touched, and in that moment something sparked between them. What started as innocent conversations about literature and philosophy had grown into something much deeper. They began meeting secretly, first in the library after hours, then in this hidden room where no one would find them. Camilla knew the danger of what they were doing. If discovered, Thomas would likely be executed, and she would face consequences beyond imagination. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Thomas pulled her into his arms, and for a moment all her worries disappeared. In this small room, hidden from the world, they were not princess and scholar. They were simply two people who had found something precious and rare. They talked for hours about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for a different life. He made her laugh with his stories and challenged her thoughts with his intelligence. But neither of them knew that Captain Marcus had been gathering information for weeks. He had interrogated servants who had seen the princess behaving strangely. He had studied the patrol routes and noticed the patterns. He had even discovered some of the old palace blueprints that showed the secret passages. Everything was coming together, and today would be the day of reckoning. As Camilla and Thomas sat together in their hidden sanctuary, the captain and his men were already in position. They had found the entrance to the secret passages and were making their way through the darkness. Their boots echoed softly against the stone, and their hands rested on their sword hilts. They moved with military precision, knowing exactly where they were going. The moment of discovery was approaching, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the secret passage, but Camilla and Thomas were too absorbed in their conversation to notice at first. They sat on simple wooden chairs in the dim candlelight, their hands intertwined. Thomas was telling her about a new manuscript that had arrived at the library, a collection of love poems from a distant land. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he described the beautiful words written centuries ago. Camilla smiled, watching his face as he spoke. This was what she treasured most about their time together. With Thomas, she could forget about protocol and duty. She could be herself, not the perfect princess everyone expected her to be. She laughed at his jokes and shared her own thoughts freely without fear of judgment. In the cold, calculating world of the palace, this warmth was more precious than all the jewels in the royal treasury. Suddenly, Thomas stopped mid-sentence. His expression changed, and he held up his hand for silence. Now Camilla heard it too. The unmistakable sound of multiple footsteps, the clink of armor, the low murmur of men's voices. Her blood ran cold. Someone was in the passages, and they were getting closer. She jumped to her feet, her mind racing. How had anyone discovered this place? They had been so careful, so cautious. Thomas moved quickly to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. The footsteps were coming from multiple directions now. They were surrounded. He turned back to Camilla, his face pale but determined. There was no escape route they hadn't already considered. This room only had one entrance, and whoever was coming knew exactly where to find them. Captain Marcus led his men through the final stretch of passage. His jaw was set in a grim line. Part of him had hoped the rumors were false, that the princess was innocent. But his investigation had been thorough, and all the evidence pointed to this moment. As a soldier, he knew his duty. As a man, he felt the weight of what he was about to do. The scandal would rock the kingdom to its core. Behind him, 5 of his most trusted guards followed in formation. Each man had been sworn to secrecy. The king had ordered that this matter be handled discreetly at first. They would confirm the situation, then report back. What happened after that would depend on what they found. Marcus raised his fist, signaling his men to stop. They had reached the door. Inside the room, Camilla and Thomas stood frozen. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Thomas positioned himself between Camilla and the door, a futile gesture of protection. He had no weapon, no armor, nothing but his determination to shield her as long as possible. Camilla's mind raced through impossible scenarios. Could she claim Thomas was a servant who had gotten lost? Could she say she had discovered him here and was about to call for help? But she knew the truth would be obvious. They stood too close together. Her hair was slightly disheveled. The intimacy between them would be clear to any observer. The candles burning in this forgotten room, the 2 chairs placed side by side, the books of poetry scattered on the small table, everything told a story of secret meetings and forbidden love. Marcus knocked firmly on the door. The sound echoed like thunder in the small space. "By order of the king, open this door immediately," his voice commanded. There was no anger in his tone, only cold authority. He knocked again, louder this time. "This is Captain Marcus of the Royal Guard. You are ordered to open this door." Thomas looked at Camilla, and in that moment, An entire conversation passed between them without words. They both knew this was the end. Whatever happened next would change both their lives forever. He squeezed her hand once, trying to give her courage. Then he stepped forward and reached for the door handle. "Wait," Camilla whispered. Her voice was shaky but firm. "Let me open it. This is my responsibility." She moved past Thomas, straightening her dress and composing her features. For years she had been trained to maintain dignity in any situation. She would face this with her head high, no matter what came next. She pulled the door open and immediately bright torchlight flooded the dim room. Captain Marcus stood in the doorway, flanked by his guards. His experienced eyes took in the scene quickly. The princess in her informal dress, the young scholar behind her, the intimate setting of the hidden room. His expression remained neutral, but inside his heart sank. The rumors were true. "Your Highness," Marcus said, bowing slightly despite the circumstances. Military protocol was so deeply ingrained in him that he showed respect even in this moment. "I am acting under direct orders from His Majesty the King. You must return to your chambers immediately." Camilla lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Captain Marcus, I suppose explanations would be pointless at this stage." Her voice was steadier than she felt. Years of royal training helped her maintain composure even when her world was falling apart. "Your Highness, I must ask you to come with us now," Marcus repeated. Then his eyes shifted to Thomas, who stood perfectly still, knowing that any sudden movement could be seen as threatening. "And you, sir, are under arrest for trespassing in the royal quarters and for crimes against the crown." "He has committed no crime," Camilla spoke quickly. "I invited him here. I use my knowledge of the palace to arrange these meetings. If anyone is to be arrested, it should be me." Marcus's expression flickered for just a moment, showing a hint of sympathy. He had daughters of his own, though they would never face situations like this. "Your Highness, please do not make this more difficult." "My orders are clear. The young man will be taken to the palace prison. You will return to your chambers under guard until the king decides how to proceed." Two guards moved forward to take Thomas by the arms. He didn't resist, but he kept his eyes on Camilla. "Remember what I told you," he said softly. "Poetry lives forever even when poets don't. Our words are truth that can never be taken away." Camilla felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. She would not cry in front of these men. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Captain, may I request that this young man be treated with respect? He is a scholar, not a criminal." "All prisoners are treated according to palace regulations," Marcus replied, which was not really an answer at all. He gestured for his men to lead Thomas away. As the scholar was escorted down the passage, he looked back once more at Camilla, trying to memorize her face, knowing he might never see her again. Marcus turned to the remaining guards. "You two will escort Her Highness back to her chambers through the main corridors, not these passages. The princess will walk with dignity, and you will show appropriate respect. But she is not to leave her rooms or speak to anyone until the king gives permission. Is that clear?" "Yes, Captain." Both guards responded in unison. Camilla took a deep breath and stepped out of the small room that had been her sanctuary. As she walked through the passage with guards on either side, she knew her life as she had known it was over. Whatever punishment awaited her, she would face it. But she would not apologize for finding love, even if it was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The walk through the palace corridors felt endless. Every servant who saw the princess being escorted by guards immediately lowered their eyes and scurried away. But Camilla knew the gossip would spread like lightning. By sunset, everyone in the palace would know something terrible had happened. By tomorrow, the entire kingdom would be whispering her name. Her chambers felt different when she entered them again. What had been her private sanctuary now felt like a prison cell, albeit a luxurious one. The guards took their positions outside her door, and she heard the distinct sound of the lock clicking into place. She was truly trapped now. She walked to the window and looked out at the palace gardens below. Life continued as normal out there. Gardeners tended the flowers, servants hurried about their duties, nobles strolled through the paths. None of them knew yet that their future queen had just been caught in the greatest scandal the royal family had faced in generations. Meanwhile, in the depths of the palace prison, Thomas sat in a cold stone cell. The guards had not been rough with him, true to Captain Marcus's orders, but they had taken everything from his pockets, his pocket watch, A few coins and a small leather journal where he wrote his thoughts. The cell was dark except for a thin beam of light coming through a high barred window. He could hear other prisoners somewhere in the distance, their voices echoing through the stone corridors. Thomas was not a brave man by nature. He was a scholar who preferred books to battles, words to weapons. But as he sat in that cell, he felt no regret about what had happened. He had known the risks from the beginning. Every time he met with Camilla, he understood that discovery could mean his death. Yet he had continued because what they shared was worth the risk. She had brought meaning to his life, and he hoped he had given her some happiness in return. Captain Marcus stood in the king's private study, delivering his report. The king sat behind his massive oak desk, his face growing darker with every word. He was an older man now, with gray hair and lines of worry etched deep in his face. He had ruled for 30 years and had weathered many storms, but this was different. This involved his own family. "You are absolutely certain of what you saw?" the king asked, though he already knew the answer. Marcus was not a man who made mistakes or jumped to conclusions. "Yes, your majesty." The princess was alone with the scholar in a hidden room. The evidence of regular meetings was clear. The arrangement of the room, the familiar way they spoke to each other. There is no doubt this has been happening for some time. Marcus kept his voice professional, reporting facts without judgment. The king rose from his chair and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "My son is away on diplomatic business. He will return in 3 days. This must be resolved before then." He turned to face Marcus. "What do you recommend?" Marcus had been expecting this question and had given it serious thought. "The scholar must be dealt with according to law, your majesty. His fate is in your hands. As for the princess, that is a more delicate matter. The marriage alliance with her family was important for the kingdom. Breaking it could have political consequences." "Political consequences," the king repeated bitterly. "My son's honor has been damaged. The crown has been disrespected, and you speak of political consequences." He slammed his hand on the desk. "The scholar will be tried for his crimes. As for the princess, I will decide her punishment after I have heard her speak for herself." In her chambers, Camilla waited. Hours passed slowly. Her ladies-in-waiting had been dismissed, and even her personal maid was not allowed to enter. Food was brought by guards who said nothing. The isolation was deliberate, she knew. They wanted her to feel the full weight of her situation, to break her spirit before the king passed judgment. As evening fell, she lit the candles in her room and sat at her writing desk. If this was to be her last night of any kind of freedom, she would use it well. She took out parchment and ink and began to write. Not a letter of apology or a plea for mercy, but something else entirely. She wrote about the nature of duty and love, about being trapped in a life not of her choosing, about the loneliness of wearing a crown before it even touched her head. She wrote about Thomas, too, though she was careful not to use his name. She described how his kindness had been a light in her darkness, how his intelligence had challenged her to think beyond the narrow confines of palace life. She wrote about the impossible choice between duty to kingdom and truth to self. The words flowed from her pen like water from a spring, months of suppressed feelings finally finding expression. Down in the prison, Thomas was experiencing something similar. Though he had no writing materials, he composed poetry in his mind. Beautiful verses about love and sacrifice, about truth and consequence. He repeated them over and over, committing them to memory. If he was to die, at least these words would live on in his mind until his last breath. Perhaps someday, somehow, they would reach Camilla, and she would know that he had thought of her until the very end. The palace servants whispered among themselves in the kitchens and hallways. Some had seen the princess being escorted back to her chambers. Others had seen a young man being taken to the prison. Slowly, the pieces came together, and the full story emerged. Reactions were mixed. Some servants were shocked and scandalized. How could the princess betray her husband and the royal family? Others were more sympathetic. They had seen how lonely she seemed, how forced her smiles were at official functions. The prince's closest advisors gathered in an emergency meeting. They needed to prepare him for what he would face when he returned. The situation had to be managed carefully to minimize damage to the royal family's reputation. Some argued for harsh punishment to show that no one, not even royalty, was above the law. Others suggested quiet discretion, perhaps sending the princess away to a distant estate where the scandal could be forgotten over time. In a small chapel within the palace walls, The royal priest knelt in prayer. He had baptized Camilla when she joined the royal family through marriage. He had blessed her union with the prince. Now he prayed for wisdom, for mercy, for guidance. Whatever happened next would test not just the laws of the kingdom, but also the values of compassion and forgiveness that his faith taught. Night fell completely over the palace. In her locked chamber, Camilla finished her writing and sealed the parchment carefully. She had no idea if anyone would ever read it, but putting her thoughts on paper had brought her some peace. She lay down on her bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually claimed her. Thomas, too, found sleep in his cold cell, though his dreams were troubled. He dreamed of libraries full of burning books, of words turning to ash and floating away on the wind. He dreamed of Camilla's face, her smile, her laughter. He woke several times in the darkness, each time taking a moment to remember where he was and why. Captain Marcus sat in his own quarters, writing his detailed report of the day's events. Every fact, every observation, every word spoken had to be recorded accurately. This document would become part of the official royal records, a historical account of a scandal that would be remembered for generations. His hand was steady as he wrote, but his heart was heavy. He had done his duty, but it brought him no satisfaction. The king did not sleep at all that night. He paced his chambers, wrestling with impossible decisions. As a father figure to his daughter-in-law, he felt disappointment and concern. As a ruler, he felt anger at the disrespect shown to the crown. As a man who had lived long enough to understand human nature, he felt a troubling sympathy. He had been in an arranged marriage himself in his youth. He understood the loneliness of duty. Dawn would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new consequences. The palace, usually so controlled and orderly, was now a place of tension and uncertainty. Everyone waited to see what the king would decide, how the story would end. But one thing was certain: life would never be quite the same again for anyone involved. Morning arrived with gray clouds covering the sun, as if the sky itself reflected the somber mood within the palace walls. Camilla woke to the sound of her chamber door being unlocked. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. A senior lady-in-waiting entered, followed by 2 maids carrying breakfast. The woman's face was carefully neutral, showing neither sympathy nor judgment. "Your Highness, you are to bathe and dress in formal attire," the lady-in-waiting announced. "His Majesty the King will see you at noon in the throne room. You are to present yourself properly, as befits your station." The formal tone made it clear this was not a request but a command. Camilla nodded silently and rose from her bed. The maids prepared her bath while the lady-in-waiting laid out the most formal dress from her wardrobe. A deep blue gown with silver embroidery, the kind worn for state occasions. Everything about it represented duty and tradition, the very things she had tried to escape. She bathed mechanically, her mind already preparing for what was to come. As the maids helped her dress and arranged her hair in an elaborate style, Camilla studied herself in the mirror. She looked every inch a princess, elegant and composed. But inside she felt like that same lonely girl who had arrived at this palace years ago, scared and uncertain. She had tried to be what everyone wanted her to be. She had failed, and now she would face the consequences. In the prison, Thomas received different treatment. Guards brought him water and bread, but no opportunity to wash or change clothes. His scholarly robes were wrinkled and dirty from the cell floor. His hair was disheveled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes from lack of proper sleep. When guards came to take him from his cell, they bound his hands with rough rope. He was a criminal now in their eyes, no longer deserving of the respect shown to a palace scholar. They led him through back corridors that servants used, away from the main palace where nobles might see. Thomas stumbled occasionally, his legs stiff from sitting on the cold stone floor all night. The guards pulled him along without sympathy. They had their orders, and personal feelings had no place in their duty. The throne room was a magnificent space that usually hosted celebrations and important ceremonies. Today it felt cold and forbidding. The king sat on his throne, dressed in his full royal regalia. His crown caught the light from the high windows, making him look more like a statue of justice than a man. Beside him stood his most trusted advisors, faces serious and formal. Captain Marcus was there too, standing at attention in his dress uniform. Guards lined the walls, and a few nobles who served on the royal council were present as witnesses. This was not a public trial, but it was official enough that whatever happened here would carry the full weight of royal law. A clerk sat at a small desk ready to record every word spoken. Camilla was brought in first, walking with measured steps despite her trembling legs. She had practiced this walk 100 times for official ceremonies, and muscle memory helped her maintain dignity now. She stopped before the throne and curtsied deeply as protocol required. "Even in these circumstances, Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and steady. The king looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Princess Camilla, you stand before me accused of grave offenses against the crown and against the sacred bonds of marriage. What say you to these charges?" Camilla met his gaze directly. "I do not deny what I have done, Your Majesty. I take full responsibility for my actions, but I ask that you understand I never intended to bring shame upon this family or this kingdom. Intentions matter less than actions," the king replied coldly. "You have broken your marriage vows. You have dishonored my son. You have used the trust placed in you to conduct secret meetings in hidden places. You have brought a commoner into those secrets, risking the security of the entire palace." Each accusation landed like a physical blow, but Camilla kept her head high. "I understand the gravity of my actions, Your Majesty. I am prepared to accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate. But I ask one thing, mercy for Thomas. He is guilty only of returning affection that I offered first. I used my position and knowledge to arrange our meetings. Without me, none of this would have happened. Do you think pleading for your lover will help your case?" One of the advisors spoke up harshly. "You compound your offense by showing more concern for a common scholar than for the royal family you married into." Before Camilla could respond, the guards brought Thomas into the throne room. He was pushed forward roughly and forced to kneel before the throne. His bound hands and disheveled appearance contrasted sharply with Camilla's formal elegance. Yet when he looked up at the king, his eyes showed no fear, only calm acceptance. "So this is the man who dared to compromise a princess of this realm," the king said, his voice heavy with contempt. "What is your name?" "Thomas Ashford, Your Majesty. I serve in the royal library as a manuscript specialist and translator." Thomas's voice was steady despite his position. "You serve in my library, eat food paid for by my treasury, sleep under a roof I provide, and this is how you repay that generosity? By seducing a married woman, a member of the royal family?" The king's anger was evident now. "I seduced no one, Your Majesty," Thomas replied quietly. "Affection grew between us naturally, born of shared conversations and mutual respect. I knew it was wrong by the laws of this land. I knew the risks, but I also knew the loneliness of two souls finding connection in an isolating world. I do not ask for mercy, but I ask for truth. What we shared was genuine, not some calculated scheme or wicked plot." Silence. An advisor shouted, "You dare speak of love in this place to defend your criminal actions?" The king raised his hand for quiet. He looked between Camilla and Thomas, seeing something in their faces that troubled him. He saw the way they glanced at each other, the unspoken support passing between them even in this dire moment. It reminded him of something from his own past, a memory he had buried long ago. "Princess Camilla," the king said finally, "you were brought to this family through an arrangement meant to strengthen alliances between kingdoms. Has my son been unkind to you? Has he mistreated you in any way?" Camilla hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The prince has never been cruel to me, Your Majesty. He has been respectful and proper in all ways. But respect and duty are not the same as understanding or companionship. I have lived in this palace for years, yet I have felt like a ghost moving through someone else's life. So you justify betrayal with loneliness?" The king's voice was sharp. "Thousands of people endure arranged marriages. Duty requires sacrifice. You are not special in bearing this burden." "I do not claim to be special, Your Majesty," Camilla replied. "I claim only to be human. I failed in my duty because I am flawed and weak. I found comfort where I should not have looked for it. I am guilty of everything you say, but I will not pretend to regret the brief happiness I found, even if it cost me everything." A murmur ran through the advisors at this bold statement. Several looked shocked that she would admit such things openly. The king's expression darkened further. This was not the tearful apology he had expected. This was something more complicated, more honest, and therefore more difficult to judge. "And you, scholar?" The king turned his attention to Thomas. "Do you have any defense for your actions? Any explanation that might spare you from the harshest punishment?" Thomas shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. I loved her, and love needs no defense even when circumstances make it impossible. If loving someone beyond my station is a crime worthy of death, then I am guilty. But I would face that death knowing I lived honestly if briefly, rather than spending a lifetime in safe silence." The king stood abruptly, and everyone in the room tensed. He walked down from his throne and approached Thomas, looking down at the kneeling scholar. For a long moment he studied the younger man's face. Then he turned to Camilla, examining her with equal intensity. Finally he returned to his throne and sat down heavily. "I will render my judgment tomorrow at the same hour," he announced. "Take the prisoner back to his cell. The princess will return to her chambers under guard. No one is to speak of these proceedings until I make my decision public." This audience is concluded. As guards moved to obey, Camilla and Thomas exchanged one last look. Whatever tomorrow brought, they had spoken their truth today. They had not begged or lied or tried to manipulate their way out of consequences. They had stood before power and admitted their hearts openly. Now they could only wait for judgment and hope for mercy they had no right to expect. The afternoon passed slowly throughout the palace. News of the throne room audience had spread despite orders for silence. Servants whispered in corners. Nobles gathered in small groups to speculate, and everyone wondered what judgment the king would deliver. Some demanded harsh punishment to uphold tradition and law. Others, particularly younger servants who had seen the princess's sadness over the years, felt unexpected sympathy. The king retreated to his private study immediately after the audience. He ordered that no one disturb him, not even for urgent matters of state. His advisors were frustrated by this, as there were documents requiring his signature and decisions needing to be made. But the guards at his door had strict instructions, and no one dared disobey. Inside the study, the king sat alone with a bottle of wine and his thoughts. He was not a cruel man by nature. His 30 years of rule had been marked by fairness and wisdom. He had always tried to balance justice with mercy, law with humanity. But this situation tested him in ways he had not anticipated. The law was clear. Adultery in the royal family was a serious crime. The scholar could be executed. The princess could be imprisoned, exiled, or divorced in disgrace. Yet something about their words in the throne room haunted him. The way they had accepted responsibility without making excuses. The way they had spoken of genuine feeling in a world that often denied such things value. It reminded him of his own past, of choices he had made when he was younger. The king walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of his study. He opened it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his royal robes. Inside were personal items he kept from his youth. Letters, a dried flower, a small painted portrait. He lifted the portrait carefully and looked at the face of a young woman he had known more than 40 years ago. Her name had been Elena, and she had been a musician in his father's court. The king, then a young prince, had fallen deeply in love with her. They had shared stolen moments similar to what Camilla and Thomas had experienced. They had talked about art and music and philosophy. She had made him laugh and helped him forget the crushing weight of future kingship. But when his father discovered their relationship, it had been ended brutally. Elena was sent away from the capital with gold coins and orders never to return. The young prince was forced to marry a princess from a neighboring kingdom for political alliance. The marriage had not been unhappy exactly. His queen had been a good woman who bore him 2 sons and served the kingdom faithfully until her death 5 years ago. They had respected each other and worked together effectively, but there had always been something missing, some spark that never ignited. He had done his duty and buried his true feelings so deep that sometimes he forgot they had ever existed. Looking at Elena's portrait now, he felt those old wounds reopen. He had never known what happened to her after she left. Had she married? Had she been happy? Had she ever thought of him over the decades? He had been too young and powerless to fight his father's decision. He had accepted duty over love because that was what princes did. Now as king, he had the power his younger self had lacked. But would he use it any differently? In her chambers, Camilla sat by the window watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Her mind replayed the audience over and over. She analyzed every word the king had spoken, every expression that had crossed his face. She tried to predict what tomorrow would bring, but found it impossible. The king had revealed nothing of his intentions. She thought about Thomas in his prison cell and wondered if he was afraid. She wished she could send him a message, some word of comfort, but she knew that was impossible. The guards outside her door would permit nothing. She was completely isolated, left alone with her thoughts and fears. Yet somehow she felt more at peace than she had in years. Whatever came tomorrow, at least she had stopped pretending. She had spoken her truth, and there was freedom in that. Down in the prison, Thomas was indeed afraid, though not of death itself. He feared dying without seeing Camilla one last time. He feared that his execution might somehow make her situation worse. He feared that the poetry he had composed in his mind would be lost forever, that the beauty of what they had shared would be forgotten in the scandal surrounding it. A guard brought him dinner, simple bread and soup. The guard was younger than the others, perhaps in his early 20s. As he set down the tray, he hesitated, then spoke quietly. "The other prisoners say you're here because you loved a princess. Is it true?" Thomas looked up, surprised by the question. "It's true, though that's not how most people would describe it." The guard nodded slowly. "My father told me I couldn't marry the girl I loved because her family was too poor. Said I needed to think about my position, my future, so I married a merchant's daughter instead. She's a good woman, but—" He trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. "But she's not the one who makes your heart sing." Thomas finished softly. "No," the guard admitted. "She's not. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, choosing duty over feeling. My father says I did, but I don't know." He looked at Thomas with unexpected kinship. "Was it worth it? Even knowing how it ended?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "Every moment with her was worth whatever price I must pay. I would make the same choice again, even knowing the cost. Love that's real, even briefly lived, is worth more than a lifetime of comfortable emptiness." The guard nodded again, something shifting in his expression. "I hope the king shows you mercy. I hope your princess remembers you kindly." Then he left quickly before anyone could question why he had spoken so long with a prisoner. That brief conversation stayed with Thomas through the evening. He realized his story was becoming larger than just himself and Camilla. Other people saw themselves in it, saw their own choices and regrets reflected. Perhaps that meant something. Perhaps their truth would resonate beyond the palace walls, regardless of how tomorrow ended. Captain Marcus also spent the evening in reflection. He had done his duty exactly as required. He had investigated thoroughly, acted decisively, and reported accurately. Yet he felt no satisfaction. He kept thinking about the look in Camilla's eyes when she pleaded for Thomas's life, caring more about his fate than her own. He thought about the dignity with which they had both faced judgment. Marcus had been married to his wife for 25 years. They had 3 children together. It was a good marriage built on partnership and respect. But if he was honest with himself, it had never had the kind of passion he had witnessed between Camilla and Thomas. Was that passion worth destroying duty for? He didn't know. He was glad he had never faced that choice. Elsewhere in the palace, the prince's advisors continued their debate. Some argued for maximum punishment to send a clear message that no one was above the law. Others suggested that destroying Camilla would damage the kingdom's relationship with her birth family, potentially costing valuable political alliances. A few, though they didn't speak loudly, wondered if perhaps the situation called for more nuance than strict law allowed. "The scholar must be punished severely," one advisor insisted. "We cannot let common people think they can pursue relationships with royalty without consequences. The social order depends on maintaining proper boundaries. But killing him makes him a martyr," another argued. "The story will spread. Young people will romanticize it. We could create more problems than we solve. And what of the princess? She is the daughter of a powerful duke. We cannot simply execute her or imprison her indefinitely without risking war. Perhaps exile? Send her to a remote monastery where she can live out her days in quiet reflection?" They talked in circles, finding no easy answer. Finally, they agreed that whatever the king decided they would support publicly. Unity of the crown was more important than individual opinions. As night fell, the king finally emerged from his study. He looked older somehow, more tired. He called for Captain Marcus and gave him specific orders for tomorrow. The captain listened carefully, his face showing surprise at several points. When the king finished, Marcus bowed and left to make preparations. The king then wrote 3 letters in his own hand. One was to his son, explaining the situation and the decision he had made. One was to Camilla's father, the duke. The third was sealed without an address, to be delivered later if circumstances required it. He locked these letters in his cabinet and sat back in his chair. Outside, the palace grew quiet as people retired to their beds. But few slept well that night. Too much uncertainty hung in the air. Tomorrow would bring answers, but whether those answers would satisfy anyone remained to be seen. The king stared at the ceiling of his bedchamber, alone with his thoughts and the ghost of Elena's memory, wondering if he had the courage to be wiser than his father had been. Morning arrived with clear skies, a sharp contrast to the gray clouds of the previous day. The change in weather felt symbolic somehow, as if nature itself was marking this as a day of transformation. Throughout the palace, people moved with nervous energy, everyone aware that today would bring the king's judgment. Camilla was awakened early and told to prepare herself. The same formal blue dress was laid out again, but this time the lady-in-waiting's expression held something different. Was it sympathy, pity? Camilla couldn't quite read it. She dressed mechanically, her hands steadier than she expected. She had spent the night accepting whatever fate awaited her. Fear had given way to a strange calm. Thomas was also roused early from his cell. Guards brought him clean clothes, simple but respectable, and allowed him to wash his face and hands. This surprised him. Condemned prisoners usually weren't given such courtesies. He tried not to read too much into it, but hope is a stubborn thing. It crept into his heart despite his attempts to prepare for the worst. The throne room filled earlier than the previous day. More nobles were present, having received formal summons to witness the king's judgment. This would be an official pronouncement, recorded in the kingdom's history. Whatever happened here would be remembered for generations. The witnesses took their positions along the walls, speaking in hushed tones. The king entered precisely at noon as promised. Everyone bowed as he took his throne. He looked different today, more composed but also more human somehow. The rage from yesterday had been replaced by something harder to define. He surveyed the room, making eye contact with several key advisors, then nodded to Captain Marcus. Camilla was brought in first, walking that same measured path to stand before the throne. She curtsied deeply and waited. Thomas followed moments later, his hands no longer bound. He was positioned several feet away from Camilla, but close enough that they could see each other. Neither showed emotion on their faces, though their eyes met briefly. "Princess Camilla, Thomas Ashford," the king began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You have both admitted to actions that violate the laws of this kingdom and the sacred bonds of marriage. The evidence against you is overwhelming and undeniable. Justice demands consequences for such transgressions." The room held its collective breath. Several advisors nodded approvingly, expecting harsh sentences to follow, but the king raised his hand before continuing. "However, I have spent considerable time reflecting on the nature of justice itself. Is justice simply the mechanical application of law, or must it also consider the complexities of human nature? I have consulted the ancient texts of our kingdom's founders, and I have searched my own conscience." This was unexpected. The advisors exchanged puzzled glances. The king was known for following precedent and tradition strictly. This philosophical tone was unusual. "Thomas Ashford, you are guilty of trespassing in royal quarters and of engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a member of the royal family. The law provides for severe punishment, potentially including execution. However, I find that your crime was one of the heart, not calculation or malice. You showed courage in accepting responsibility and speaking your truth, even knowing it would not help your case." Thomas stood perfectly still, waiting for the final word that would determine his fate. "Therefore, I sentence you to exile from the capital. You will be given safe passage to the port city and enough gold to begin a new life elsewhere. You will never return to this city or attempt to contact Princess Camilla again. If you violate these terms, the original harsh sentence will be carried out. Do you understand?" Thomas's eyes widened in shock. He had expected death or years of imprisonment. Exile was harsh, yes, but it was also life and freedom. "I understand, Your Majesty. Thank you for your mercy." His voice was thick with emotion. The king then turned his attention to Camilla. "Princess Camilla, your situation is more complex. You are not only guilty of breaking your marriage vows, but also of using your position and knowledge to facilitate these secret meetings. You have damaged the honor of this family and risked the political alliance your marriage represents." Camilla lifted her chin, ready to hear her fate with dignity. The king studied her for a long moment before continuing. "I have written to your father, the Duke, explaining the situation. I have also written to my son, the prince. After much consideration, I have decided that your marriage will be annulled. This is not divorce, which would carry greater shame, but a recognition that the marriage was perhaps unwise from the beginning. You will return to your father's house within the week. Gasps echoed through the throne room. Annulment was unexpected. It was neither the harsh punishment some demanded, nor the light slap on the wrist others feared. It was something more nuanced, more complicated. However, the king continued, raising his voice over the murmurs. You will not return in disgrace. I am writing to your father to explain that you showed poor judgment, but also honesty and courage in accepting responsibility. Your dowry will be returned to your family in full. You may eventually remarry if your father permits it and if you choose to do so. Camilla felt tears threatening for the first time. This was more mercy than she had dared hope for. Your Majesty, I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me by learning from this experience, the king said firmly. And by living with integrity going forward, wherever your life may lead you. You are young still. This mistake does not have to define your entire existence. One of the senior advisors stepped forward, unable to contain himself. Your Majesty, with respect, this judgment is highly unusual. The precedent— I am aware of the precedent, the king interrupted. I am also aware that blindly following precedent without wisdom leads to repeating the mistakes of the past. I have made my decision based on careful consideration of all factors, including those of human compassion and practical consequence. He stood from his throne, and everyone immediately bowed. Let it be recorded that I, as king of this realm, have rendered this judgment on this day. The scholar will leave the capital by week's end under escort. The princess will return to her family with honor if not glory. This matter is now concluded. But before anyone could move, the king added one more thing, his voice softer. I would also like to say this, though it is not part of the official judgment. Love is not a crime, but circumstances can make it impossible. Both of you found something genuine in a world that often values appearances over truth. I cannot condone your actions, but I will not destroy you for being human. Let that be my legacy in this matter. The room remained silent as the king descended from his throne and left through the private door behind it. Only when he was gone did the murmuring begin. Some advisors were angry, feeling the judgment was too lenient. Others were relieved that wisdom had prevailed over strict law. The nobles present would have much to discuss in the coming days. Captain Marcus approached Thomas and Camilla. You will each be returned to your respective places for now. Princess, you have 1 week to prepare for departure. You may take your personal belongings and one lady-in-waiting if she chooses to accompany you. Scholar, you will remain in a comfortable room under guard until arrangements are made for your journey. As Thomas was led away, he managed to catch Camilla's eye one last time. So much was communicated in that brief glance. Gratitude for survival, sorrow for separation, acceptance of their fate. Then he was gone, and Camilla was escorted back to her chambers by guards who now treated her with something closer to respect than contempt. In the following days, preparations were made for both departures. Thomas was given new clothes suitable for travel, a leather bag with enough gold coins to establish himself in a new city, and documents guaranteeing him safe passage. The young guard who had spoken to him visited once more to wish him well, slipping him an extra small purse of coins and a note that read, "For speaking truth to power." Camilla packed her belongings with the help of her most loyal maid, who had chosen to accompany her back to her father's house. Many items she left behind, taking only what was truly personal. Books, letters from her family, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. The palace that had been her prison for years felt different now as she prepared to leave it. She felt both relief and strange sadness. On the day before her departure, a sealed letter was delivered to her chambers. It bore no identifying marks, but when she opened it, she recognized Thomas's handwriting immediately. The letter was brief. I will carry the memory of our time together always. You taught me that truth matters more than safety, that honest feeling is worth any cost. I hope you find happiness in your new life, wherever it leads. Our words, our poetry, our moments together, these live forever in my heart. Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me when I was invisible to the rest of the world. Camilla read it 3 times, committing every word to memory, then burned it as she knew she must. Some things were too precious to risk others finding, but the words remained in her heart. just as Thomas had promised. Thomas left the capital 2 days before Camilla, traveling with a small escort to the port. From there, he would board a ship to a distant city where scholars were welcome and the scandal of the capital would be unknown. As he looked back at the palace one final time from the city gates, he thought about Camilla and hoped she would find peace. Camilla's departure was more formal. Her father had sent a proper carriage and guards to collect her. As she left through the palace gates, she looked back at the building that had been both prison and home. She thought about Thomas and hoped he would find success in his new life. She thought about the king's unexpected mercy and wondered what had changed his heart. What Camilla didn't know was that the king watched her departure from a high window in his study. In his hand he held the portrait of Elena. After Camilla's carriage disappeared from view, he finally opened the third letter he had written days ago. It was addressed to Elena if she still lived. In it, he had explained his decision and why he had chosen mercy over law. He didn't know if she would ever receive it or if she was even still alive, but writing it had helped him understand himself better. Years would pass. Thomas would become a respected translator in a coastal city, never marrying but finding fulfillment in his work and friendships. Camilla would eventually marry a kind merchant who gave her the freedom to be herself, and they would build a genuine partnership. The king would rule for 10 more years before passing peacefully in his sleep, his decision in this case remembered as an example of wise judgment. The story of the palace guard bursting into Camilla's chamber would be told and retold over generations. Some versions would add dramatic details that never happened. Others would moralize about duty versus desire. But those who knew the truth understood it was really a story about having the courage to choose mercy when law demanded harshness, about recognizing that being human means sometimes failing while trying to find genuine connection in a world that often values appearances over truth. And in the end, that was the legacy of that one moment when guards burst through a hidden door and exposed a secret that changed several lives forever. Not a tale of scandal and shame, but rather one of understanding that justice without compassion is cruelty, and law without wisdom is tyranny. The king had learned this lesson long ago when he lost Elena. He had been given a chance to apply that lesson differently, to be wiser than his father had been, and he had taken it. That choice echoed through time, touching everyone involved and teaching future generations that sometimes the most courageous act is choosing mercy when revenge would be easier.